Last year, my very good friend and colleague from Thailand, Dr. T, and I were able to spend some time trying to learn from the experience of the boys trapped in the cave in northern Thailand about resilience, about what helped them get through this experience. T and I thought that we would learn from them most about individual resilience, how each of us as individuals might learn to cope better. But what they explained to T is that what really sustained them was community resilience, how they looked after one another, cared for one another, and were fair and kind to one another at a time of very great stress. And what had a great impact on me from their experience was the way that they retained their optimism throughout. They always felt that they were going to be rescued, and so they were always getting themselves ready for life after the cave. T and I then had the chance to share some of this learning in some talks and seminars and discussions with the Jewish community in London in early 2020. And in those discussions, we did talk a bit about individual resilience, but actually the community turned out to be much more interested in community resilience. And so we spent some time talking about how we build and keep communities that are safe and kind and fair to all. And for those of you who are there, you may remember T saying that we need to do this in advance. We can't wait until a crisis hits. We need to be getting this right before, because if a crisis does hit us, we're going to need to be able to draw on those community resources right away. Little did any of us realize that at the time that we were having these discussions, a crisis was in fact brewing. And now we find ourselves in early April and just before Passover in a situation that has some parallels with the boys in the cave. We are kind of stuck, and we don't know how long this thing is going to last, and we have to find our own good enough way of getting through it. And in a moment, I want to share with you the things that T and I felt we learned from those boys about specific things that we can do to get through a crisis at a time like this. But before I come to that, I wanted to share some of the things that I've observed in our society and in our community over the past few weeks, which have given me great reassurance and optimism about the future. In my hospital, the Royal Free, I see clinical staff showing tremendous commitment and dedication and hard work, all aimed at trying to provide the very best possible care to members of our society who are very unwell. And at the same time, we're all trying so hard to look after one another and keep one another well and focused and having enough resources to go home so that we can be good with our families when we finish work. And if I look at wider society, and I just use the newspapers for this, when the crisis started, there were many shaming articles about people having fights over toilet paper in supermarkets and so on. But as the crisis has deepened, we've moved to something much more important in the newspapers, articles about how we get through this, about how our marriages survive, about how we keep our children and ourselves well, about financial planning at economically very difficult times, and so on. So it seems to me that we potentially have in ourselves a natural tendency to try to be like the boys in the cave and try to be optimistic about the future and to try to conduct ourselves well as a community. And this brief video is simply to give some examples of the things that we can all try to do to make that work a bit better and to pick ourselves up when we're struggling to do that. There are a few key themes, and I'm going to go through those in brief because you will find a very lovely PowerPoint designed by my colleagues in the Community Wellbeing Project on the page's website that you can refer to for more detail. I just wanted to suggest a couple of things from that I found have worked for me, but of course you may find other things work better for yourself. One key theme is being kind to oneself. At a time like this, when we're all super stressed, we're not going to be able to help anybody else if we don't first look after ourselves reasonably well and set aside some time to do that. And for me, when I think about my work in the hospital and the responsibilities that I have to remind myself of point number 3 on that slide, which is that not every problem is my problem. I need to remember which are the issues that I have responsibility for, and on those issues, I can only do my best. Good enough is quite enough at a time like this, and I shouldn't be aiming for perfection, because if I were to try to, I will disappoint myself, make myself miserable, and wear myself out. At a time like this, we can just be good enough on the things that truly are our responsibility. Secondly, we need to be helpful to others. There's something magical about being helpful to others because of the way our brains work. If we are kind to other people, not only do they cheer up, but it also fires up the chemicals in our own brains that make us feel better as we're helping. So it really, really is a win-win. And the bit of that I'm trying to work on really hard every day is to say please, and most especially thank you, to everyone who's working so hard, because a lot of people feel like me, am I being good enough? Am I doing the right thing? And it reassures other people when we say thank you, because we're conveying to them, yes, they were good enough and what they did was really helpful. So I'm trying to practice that a lot, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this idea with you. It's an anxious time. And when we're anxious, we tend to be on the go all the time. And that's absolutely exhausting. And so we all have to find ways of slowing ourselves down. What works for me is the idea of the American psychologist Martin Seligman that we should try every day, if we possibly can, to think of 3 things that went quite well. Not big things like identifying a magical cure for COVID-19, but the small things that really matter. And not only to do this on one's own, but to do it with friends and family and colleagues, to ask other people, especially when they start getting a bit stressy or despondent about the future, what were the 3 things that worked quite well for them over the past 24 hours or over the past few days. And what I found, if I practice this enough, is it pushes away some of the more difficult thoughts, and my head begins to be much more filled up with positive and constructive and creative thoughts. So I try to practice this as often as I can remember to do it, and I do like it when other people ask me what my 3 good things are. I do also find it helpful to spend a little bit of time thinking in a nice way about the future. And for me, in 2 sorts of ways. Firstly, a pleasurable way, thinking about the holidays that we've all had to cancel because of this, and about the possibility that we might be able to have them in the future. Thinking especially about getting back together face-to-face and in person with close family and friends, instead of having to do everything through screens at the moment. I like to think about that, and I find myself looking forward to specific occasions, birthdays, particular times when we might get together, and really cherish being back together once again in the way that we used to love doing. The other way I think about the future is in terms of what I feel I'm learning about this crisis, and I see my colleagues doing this in the hospital too. Not only are people working really, really hard, but we're also thinking about what lessons we might take from this, about how to look after all of our patients better in the future, and about how to look after one another as colleagues, and to take out of our daily lives at work some of the things that weren't so helpful, and fill them up with all the things that are meaningful and helpful and rewarding and useful for the people who need to come to our hospital to get help. And when I'm feeling worried about the future, I do find it helpful to do practice some of these other kinds of thoughts. And it might be nice to do them not just on one's own, but also with other people. And this is my own version of what Dr. T and I called short-term realism, long-term optimism. Never before in my life have I heard so many people saying, in relation to what's going on now, it is what it is. There really are things right now that we can't change. So our goal has to be to try to get through it reasonably well, and then to work really hard on constructing and keeping the sort of future that we all want to have. It is a difficult time, though, and I'm very aware that this advice may not be enough for all of us, including myself. And so we all have to have in mind the possibility that we might need to get some additional help. And if we're not sure about whether we're going to know that accurately about ourselves, we need to make sure that we've buddied up with someone else who's going to be able to tell us kindly but firmly that we need to go off and get some more help. And you will find at the end of the PowerPoint on Page's website some links to organizations where anyone could go and get more help. And if those aren't enough for you, please, please, please ensure that you get the help that you need. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I wish all of you the very, very best at this particular time.